About a year ago, the Walt Disney Company announced a $60 billion capital investment for the parks and resorts around the world. This was a 10-year plan, much bigger than had previously been done. But one of the things that we observed almost immediately was the fact that the Walt Disney Company seemed to give very little guidance on what this was actually going to be spent on. And sure enough, pretty soon, Wall Street caught on to it. And Caroline Reed from Forbes magazine recently did an extensive piece on this very topic because Wall Street still, to this day in 2024, isn't terribly impressed. And it's reflected in the stock price because Wall Street seems to be just brushing off all of these grand plans for Disney parks. And that's a real problem because it's the parks and resorts at Disney that drive top and bottom line revenues.
Renegade Online.
This one came out today. This from Caroline Reed on Forbes magazine. How Disney's theme parks cast a dark spell on its fortunes. Now, that's not a headline that you'd expect to see a couple of years ago. You were talking about terrible movie studios, terrible television studios, Marvel Phases 4 and 5 being an abysmal failure. Star Wars had collapsed. Never thought the parks would have issues. We said years ago, though, if the parks ever start having problems, then we're really in trouble at Disney. Almost exactly a year ago, Disney's CEO Bob Iger and Josh D'Amaro made a blockbuster announcement. They revealed that over the next decade, Disney's investment in parks, experiences, and products would nearly double to roughly $60 billion. It sure seemed to give a sparkle to the media giant's declining stock price. And again, this was a Nelson Peltz deflection. Remember, they came out with this announcement in the middle of the proxy war.
Turbocharged.
And they basically had no plan for it. All they said was $60 billion, $60 billion. What you going to do with it? Don't know.
Turbocharged.
Nothing there. Over the course of the previous 2.5 years, Disney has lost a staggering 59% of its value, partly due to the disastrous timing of heavy investment in Disney Plus streaming.
Hey, Valiant, just to punch that a little bit, 59% of the value of the company's gone, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, folks, if you think we're being overly negative in our news coverage of this company, how else are we ever supposed to cover a company that loses essentially 60% of its value in 3 years?
It's like Ubisoft right now.
What's the right way to cover that? That's not negative.
You lost 90% or 80% of your total value in the last 3 or 4 years. That's Ubisoft.
The people who are telling you that it's all roses and sunshine and sparkles and glitter and rainbows. Well, it might be rainbows, but it's definitely not good. It's the people who are telling you all things are positive and happy at Disney, they're just lying. They're just lying. I mean, you can't drop this kind of percentage without there being a fundamental core problem at the very heart of your company. It just can't happen.
Yeah. And they go through the history here. I don't want to go through all the minutia. We know the story where Disney stock price rose in 2021. Everything that happened with the pandemic era, the growth in Disney Plus, it goes through that whole history. But Caroline brings up a point here that many investors did in the beginning. Disney's strong back catalog alone of film and television would have been enough to tempt many subscribers to sign up to Disney Plus. If it had only put this on its platform, it wouldn't have incurred any significant additional costs. Instead, it spent billions and billions and billions and billions on exclusive streaming content, causing the DTC segment to generate billions of dollars in operating losses, which they hit a record of $1.5 billion in the fourth fiscal quarter of 2022, just about 2 years ago now. But here we go. Let's talk about the park side, because she's setting all this up. It's like, Disney had this amazing growth based on the promise of DTC that hasn't really come to fruition. Iger, when he came back, started making sweeping management changes and slashing streaming spending as a part of a $7.5 billion cost-cutting plan. Despite this, Disney stock price hasn't returned to its glory days. Over the 2 years since Bob returned to the helm, it has largely stayed under $100 per share, and the highest price is hit $122, which is 39% off of its March 2021 record when Chapek was in charge. The last thing that appeared to be the cause was Disney's Experiences division. Its performance appeared to be fairy tale compared to Disney's direct-to-consumer, or Disney Plus and Hulu. When the lockdown ended, consumers had tremendous pent-up demand to travel and were flush with furloughed cash so they could pay a premium in order to visit the parks. However, perhaps the most transformative change across all of Disney's theme parks has been the scrapping of the queue-cutting passes that were previously a complimentary privilege, the old fast passes, right? With each entrance ticket. They now come at a cost, and according to a recent data leak, we covered this before, reported by the Wall Street Journal, they generated more than $724 million in pre-tax revenue between October of 21 and June of 24. The price rises combined with the cost cut was a magic formula that increased both revenue and profit, which compensated for the colossal streaming losses. Disney's Experiences division accounted for just over a third of its $88.9 billion in revenue and more than two-thirds of its $12.9 billion in operating income in the year through September 30th of 2023. That was the end of last fiscal year. Now, let me stop there because I always remind folks of this when they always ask about, bad performances of TV shows and Disney movies, at least before Inside Out 2 and Deadpool and Wolverine. They don't matter. Two-thirds of the profit of the company, two-thirds of the operating income is from parks and experiences, and that's mostly from Orlando. That's what pays the bills at Disney. That's what makes the money at Disney. The other third, the overwhelming majority of the other third is live sports and television. Movies and stuff like that, teeny tiny little fraction of a nothing.
Just to accentuate what you're saying and put it into real terms for folks out there listening, Inside Out 2 became the highest performing feature-length film at the box office in the history of cinema. Stock didn't move based on that. We're not here to downplay it. It's culturally important. It matters in terms of Disney being able to return to making ecosystems of franchise economy. But in terms of an immediate response from stockholders, if there's a good movie or bad movie, nothing compared to the parks. Nothing. I mean, like a couple of percent. It's nothing compared. On September 19th last year, Disney announced the $60 billion investment in the Disney Experiences division with great fanfare. Quote, "We have an ambitious growth story that is supported by a proven track record and a bold vision for the future of our parks business," boasted Josh D'Amaro. It failed to enchant investors. On the very same day that Disney announced the investment, Disney's stock dropped to about 2.35% to its close at $81.94. It didn't stop there, and 15 days later it fell again, closing at $79.32, lowest price in almost a decade, and it wasn't an isolated occurrence. So again, going back through memory lane, the announcement of the $60 billion CapEx, Wall Street didn't care. In fact, it gave them more questions like it did with us than it did actually any hope for a change here. And of course, she goes back and Caroline reminds everybody, at the time, Disney was stuck in a battle with Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, which then Disney ceded the battle to Florida and to Ron DeSantis. They threw their hands up and said, "We give up." Of course, they'll tell you that they won, but DeSantis controlled district gave initial power to approve this was earlier this year on June 5th, basically after the lawsuit was dismissed. On June 5th of this year, the DeSantis controlled district, now the Central Florida Tourism Oversight District, formerly Reedy Creek, gave initial approval to a proposed $17 billion 15-year development plan for Walt Disney World, opening the door to the construction of a potential fifth theme park there, although Disney has been mum as to whether they're going to add a fifth gate. And I don't think they're going to. This was literally just approval that if they ever did in the next 15 years, that they would have the ability to do so, because you get into all kinds of rainwater and build anywhere near the actual Reedy Creek Wildlife Preserve area. So there all kinds of stuff has to go through approvals. Yeah. I don't think they have any plans to build a fifth gate.
Not right now. It doesn't seem so. I mean, they wouldn't be so desperate to pour concrete into the rivers of America if that were the case. So
Exactly.
It wasn't music to investors' ears, however, and Disney's stock price dropped 1.46% to close that day that the approval was given. The development plan needed a final vote from the district to take effect, and it got it on June 12th. Disney share price, again, no rally there. Disney teased the first fruits of the expansion last month ahead of its D23 convention. Didn't help the stock price. 4 days later, Disney announced new attractions for all the theme parks around the world, including new lands in Orlando themed to villains, Indiana Jones, and the computer-animated movie from Pixar, Cars. When Disney shares opened the following morning, they fell 0.4% again. Indeed, the investor apathy ran so deep that Disney announced in its second quarter earnings release on May 7th this year, our entertainment division of Disney Plus, had made its first profit. Even that didn't boost its stock price, which fell by 1.7%. Ditto for Disney's announcement on July 24th that Inside Out 2 had become the highest grossing animated movie of all time, unadjusted for inflation, I might add. With total takings of $1.7 billion, Disney's stock price dropped about 0.5% that day. With the direct-to-consumer business finally turning a profit and Record Breakers being released in theaters, the performance of Disney's Experiences division came under the spotlight. It soon became clear what was actually casting a dark spell on the company's stock price. Again, reminding folks, we told you, when the parks start going wrong, this is when you panic. This is when things are bad, because it's the cash machine. And this is the observation of Forbes magazine now. The first indication of this came during Disney's second quarter 24, when CFO Hugh Johnston warned of a softening in theme park attendance due to a, quote, global moderation from peak post-COVID travel. In short, the furlough money has long since been spent, and the travelers who wanted to visit parks have now done so. That's just the start, as the cost of these tickets has become so high that it's putting off new visitors. A recent report by CNBC, according to Wolf Research, the price of a one-day ticket to Disney World in Orlando has risen by 56% over the past decade to a little over $150, outpacing U.S. national inflation by 24 percentage points. Lending Tree found that 60%, that's 60% of people, according to Lending Tree, who have never been to a Disney park, said that the cost of going was the main reason. Worryingly, the survey also concluded that the average amount of debt that Americans get to visit Disney parks comes to about $1,700. And 41% of them, this is terrible, 41% of them regretted taking it out. Yikes.
That's a terrible stat for Disney.
Yeah.
It goes, and Disney would likely have internal numbers that show something similar to this, but it's not something they would want publicly available. It goes against the magic.
Yeah. I mean, think about that. If you walk up to 100 people and interview them, have you been to Disney? Have you been to Disney? Yes or no? Of the people who say no, 60% of the people who say no because, oh, it just costs too much money. There's no way. But just to go to Disney World in Florida? I mean, that's a sad state, right?
3 years ago, we reported that they were aiming for the families across the globe, the elites who are making $400,000 or more per year.
Right.
And I've said ever since we found that out, it was insane. I mean, the people making $400,000 or more a year, the global elites, they're going to the French Riviera. They're not going to Disney's Riviera.
Disney's trying to cater to these Disney adults, and it's not working. The real thing for me that sticks out here is the 41% of people who went into debt to take a vacation said they regretted it. That is stunning. If I go somewhere and I spend a bunch of money to go on a trip, I damn well have better enjoyed it. It's very rare that I turn around and go, oh my God, that was a complete waste of time and money. It happens. But I mean, I don't remember going on a family vacation where that was the case. But I mean, 41% of the people are regretting this. I'm willing to bet you now that I want to know how many of that 41% are families with children and how many of the 41% are just Disney adults.
I was trying to look this up, but I think it's something like 1/3 of all families that go to Disney World go into debt to do so. And I wish I could find that number. That was within the last month or so, we had that statistic come out.
Yeah.
So, and I remember, I was doing a video telling people, don't do this. Don't go into debt to go to Disney World. That's crazy.
I don't know exactly. I'd love to see the criteria of like what they classify as going into debt. Because again, just because you put it on a credit card doesn't necessarily mean you're going into debt for it. You're just using a credit card, right? You got to be using something. You book it. You're not shoving cash into your computer to pay for a Disney trip, right? So I don't know if that means, oh, well, we paid for the trip over like 2 months or 3 months, or we put it on a credit card. We paid the credit card over a year at 15 or 20% credit card revolving interest. That's going into debt, right? So I'd love to know the criteria, but I mean, I book a trip, I get the credit card out and then put it on that and then pay it when it's, so I don't know what we're talking about. Like technically I'm going into debt when I do that, even if it's for 30 to 45 days.
I've got it, Valiant. It's worse.
Okay.
Oh, wait, hang on. Let me get this. Out of the New York Times, 45% of families that go to Disney World go into significant debt to do so. Good Lord. Now, what that means is we could run the numbers and we could figure out the number of total families, period, the percentage of total families, period, that come away regretting their decision to go to Disney, but it's not insignificant.
Yeah. But, no, it's a big piece. 41% of the people that go into debt. So, I mean, are regretting that. Now they're regretting going into debt, or they're regretting going into debt for Disney, or they just regret going to Disney.
Correction, like I said, 45% according to the New York Times. My apologies.
But getting back to this piece from Caroline, she says, it has led to furious fans slamming Disney on social media. And we've seen it. And not just people that hate the stuff Disney's putting in the theater. In March, longtime Disney fan Jake Williams and his partner did just that when they explained that Disney World charged them $886 for 1 day at the Magic Kingdom, as well as a night at the mid-tier Port Orleans Hotel and meals in average restaurants. Given these high prices, it's little wonder Johnston said in May that, quote, relative to the post-COVID highs, things are tending to normalize. After crunching the numbers, Brandon Nispel of KeyBank Capital Markets added that Disney's domestic park business will be pressured for the rest of 2024, and it was no exaggeration. I think we actually covered Nispel's comments several months ago from KeyBank, because he made some comments on the parks, and I want to say he was also chiming in. It might have been on the Hulu deal before that, but I know we've cited Brandon Nispel from KeyBank a couple of times here in the past. Not so long ago, Disney's executives liked to boast that its Parks and Experiences division had delivered record profit and revenue for the multiple quarters, but now those days are gone. The latest results show that in the third quarter through June 29, the company generated $4.3 billion of operating profit on $23.2 billion of revenue, which was up 4% on the same period the previous year. It's a respectable result, but a deeper dive in the data revealed a worrying trend for Disney's Experiences division. Higher guest spending at Disney's domestic parks and cruise lines, as well as increased spending per room, drove Experiences revenue up by 2% to $8.4 billion. However, it's a sharp decline on the 13% increase in the revenue of the equivalent segment over the same period in 2023 compared to 22. Worse still, the operating profit of Disney's Experiences division declined by 3% to $2.2 billion in the third quarter compared to the same period last year. It was driven by costs climbing at Disney's domestic parks, as well as a lack of attendance growth. It is set to say that in this rut, or set to stay in this rut for some time. And when you think about the inflationary pressures that we've had here, not just in the U.S., but around the globe, if your per capita spending increased 2%, drove up revenues, Experiences revenues up 2%, but your average ticket prices and what you're charging customers across the board was up 5 to 10%. That means that your increase in revenues is not actually keeping pace with your inflation, because fewer customers are showing up now paying those higher prices, and there's not enough of those customers now to just balance things out. You're sliding backwards, and this is what Caroline Reed is signaling here. This aggressive price hiking at Disney, it's really catching up to them. And people, like we talk about all the time, it's a price to value relationship, and people just don't feel like they're getting the value there. And this is going to be a continued downward trend. All the money they can spend, $60 billion in new CapEx. You know what I hear when they say that? I hear we're going to be raising our prices substantially over the next 10 years to justify this $60 billion. With beyond where they even are now, which is already hurting them. But maybe that's just me. But I just don't see this as being a long-term win. Disney's third quarter earnings statement revealed that demand moderation.
Love that term, by the way.
Yeah, demand moderation. Right. It means people don't want to come here as much anymore. That's what demand moderation. Right.
How about this? Decreasing attendance.
Yes.
There's normal English, Disney. I know you don't want to use it.
Decreasing attendance. The demand moderation we saw in our domestic business in Q3 could impact the next few quarters, right? And we all know what happened with Disney stock after these last couple of earnings calls.
More than a couple, more than several, a few.
Yeah. So they're talking, into next calendar year is where we are.
Yeah, because I'm sure Epic Universe is going to increase the desire of people to see Disney World.
Yeah, and look at this. We expect Q4. This is what we're in right now, kids. This is the earnings call that'll be in November. We expect Q4 experiences segment operating income to decline by mid-single digits versus the prior year quarter. It slowed growth to 2%, 3% year over year. Now they're expecting we're going to see a negative number when it comes to year over year growth in the quarter that we're in now. That's going to end in 15 days, September 30th, the end of the fiscal year. During the results announcement, Hugh Johnson gave insights to the reasons for the decline at Disney's domestic parks. He explained that the, quote, lower-income consumer is feeling a little bit of stress.
Huh.
I wonder why.
Can't imagine.
Yeah, I mean, with going into a Disney park and it's going to cost you $1,000 to walk in there for a day, with a family of a husband, a wife, 2 kids. It's going to cost you.
And by the way, these numbers are not, they're easy to figure out. That mid-level moderate resort you talked about, which was, I believe we said I don't remember which one we said. It was was it French Riviera? Was it, anyway, whatever it was, $400, $500 a night. Okay. So there's half that 1,000. So tickets to Magic Kingdom going to cost you $1.50 per person.
Oh yeah. When they were doing the example earlier with the guy staying at Port Orleans.
Port Orleans. Thank you. Okay. So that's a moderate resort that's going to cost you, $380, $420, somewhere around there. $150 each for each ticket. Add on Genie Plus, which is going to be an additional $15, $25, somewhere in that range per person. Your meals are going to cost you about $20 to $30 per person, unless you're really smart and you know how to game the system a little bit. You're talking about $1,000 to $1,200 easy. So these are not sort of sensational stories where people figured out, how can I get the clickbait by charging up as much as we can. These are, you're going to pay this if you go to Disney, unless you're really savvy and you really know what you're doing to escape it.
During the results announcements, the lower income consumer is feeling a little bit of stress. The high income consumer is traveling internationally a bit more. I think you're going to see more of a continuation of those trends in terms of the top line. He added, again, this is Disney's chief financial officer, we saw attendance flat in the quarter with a flattish revenue number forecast for the fourth quarter and a slowdown expected for, quote, a few quarters. This malaise and disenchantment from fans is a black mark on Josh D'Amaro's resume. Famous for his sparkling, toothy grin, he's a regular visitor to the parks and often stops for selfies with guests and staff who are known as cast members due to the role they play in the themed environment. Investing $60 billion in experiences when its outlook is so uncertain seems like a tremendous gamble. The fattest margins in theme parks are to be found on the high-priced food, beverage, and merchandise. The higher the attendance, the higher the spending on them. As we have reported, the real magic formula is getting more guests through the turnstiles without spending vast sums on building new attractions from scratch. Updating attractions, known as plussing in the trade, rather than building new ones is a much more cost-effective way. However, waiving the fees for queue cutting would be an even cheaper way to start. Although it would remove a lucrative revenue stream, it would also boost visitor numbers and thereby merchandise, food, and beverage sales. In turn, this would actually increase profits, though not as much as the queue cutting passes do, as they come with no costs. However, if the price puts off too many guests from visiting the parks, the overall level of profit is not going to be as high as it could be. Remember 2 years ago right now, things were terrible. Bob Chapek didn't understand how bad things were. $1.5 billion in losses for direct-to-consumer that quarter and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, again, they ran the man off over this. You've got the parks that are just flatlining right now. Is anybody talking about changing of the guard in November?
How about that? No.
Is Bob Iger going to find himself at an Elton John concert on a Sunday night and get a phone call or something? I mean,
listen, they sacrificed so much money from American people. For the average person who they have no idea they're even invested in Disney, but they have these huge mutual funds and such that are invested, their 401ks, their pension plans, all that. Disney decided to sacrifice all that by getting rid of Chapek and bringing in Iger, and it was all political. Yeah. So, and we're now in a situation where the company is unable to pull itself out of the rut because they have a glut of people who don't care one iota about the parks. They're simply concerned about their legacies and their yachts. And by the way, you're not invited to the yacht.
It's amazing to me. It really is that we've gotten this far. It's more or less the issue that there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of, at least not yet. I have a feeling it's got to happen in November. There has to be a lot more questions asked of people like Iger.
60% decline. I think it's time for questions.
Yeah, I don't know what else to do except to sit here and go, well, I guess Nelson Peltz was right again.
Make sure you're subscribed to Valiant Renegade and join us every Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern for the live show.